Prague, and he dedicates it to, and Garland appears in John Dee's notes. So it's obvious that actually Shakespeare is dedicating his plays to the wizard who's making the storm, Midsummer Night's Dream, and the Tempest, which we're about to get to. But before I tell that story, the Tempest story, which is the end of this story, the story within the story within the story, the play is the thing in which we'll capture the conscience of the king. What I'd like to tell you is about group mind experience. Now, if you look at something like Midsummer Night's Dream, what you see is you see a sequence of emotions where you have opposing couples. First you see love, then you see anger, then you see hate, then you see jealousy. You see a group of people having a sequence of emotions in precise time from a different angle. Okay? And now what you find yourself at the end of the play, and this is the classic, this is the main lesson you're ever supposed to learn from your literature teacher teaching you what Shakespeare means. And every Shakespearean teacher ends up with the same message. Shakespeare is about the psychology of alchemy. Everybody knows that. But what does that mean in physics? What it means is that if you see a couple experience good sex, then you see a couple experience extreme anger, and then you see a couple experience hate, and then you see extreme joy. But if you do that in time, and you dance with the couples, at the end of the play, you find yourself feeling for everyone as if it was you. Now that's called plasma fusion. And that is the solution to a symmetry problem called compression. The name for perfect compression, the black hole, is called ALCHEMY. Do you get it? So if you actually experience that emotion in time, and if you understand even a little bit about the physics of what actually emotion is, now this may be, if there's musicians in the group, you may appreciate. It's called the Sentics literature, where we first saw that the actual definition of emotion is actually the ability to make a simple set of harmonic ratios. That's all it is. So emotion is actually defined the same in every culture on the planet based on a simple set of wave shapes. The book is called Sentics. Website, Manfred Klein's, he's a friend. If you touch a button and say, feel joy, Now if you touch a button, the button is just a button on a spring, that's all it is, centimeter, and feel anger, you go, feel hate. Now, touch that button and feel love. Okay? This is pressure, this is time. And this is the wave shape that describes emotion in every culture on planet Earth. It's been measured. It's clear. Now, the thing that the universal geometry of emotion in music and in touch, let me tell you how profound this is. If you study the shape of the folds of the Pieta of Michelangelo, the shape of the carving in the stone is precisely the Sentic waveform for grief. Talk about architecture as frozen music. So the point is that if you establish what this ratio of the definition of emotion in music is, then I discovered this. Is if you take the beginning of the emotion and the end of the wave shape and do the simple ratio from the beginning to the end versus the moment of maximum, you get a simple set of ratios. The destructive emotions, anger and hate, are destructive interference waveforms, 1/7 and 1/3. Joy is 1/6. And love is a wave that is most tantrically delayed. So when you want to squeeze someone to say, I love you, it's actually very important to do the geometry right. Which is to say that you tantrically delay the onset of the maximum pressure of your hug. So don't rush it. When you squeeze someone to say joy, Your max pressure point is 1/6 in the duration of your squeezing process. The way you find out is you say, darling, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? If you did your academically precise love hug accurately, she will feel a tingle in her DNA because when you squeezed her in that hugging process, you waited until 0.618 into the duration of your hug for max pressure. Aren't you glad you know that? Have I added to the romance for you? So this process establishes a piezoelectric translation of vorticity in the stricture of the DNA, and this is a top-down view, whereby the electrical energy of your compression wave, do you see what happens? The tingle in her DNA, you get the flavor. So, the point is that emotion actually is a sequence of compression algorithms which can be experienced in a fusion process. The optimization, the climax of the fusion process being right there, of course. At any rate, so what's happening in the Shakespearean theater, by experiencing this emotion from this view and this one from that view, in the correct angle, you actually are literally creating a plasma fusion event called the group mind experience. E pluribus unum, from many one, how shall we go through the heart of the sun? You get the flavor. Okay, now to finish our story. The only way out of the solar system is through the heart of the sun, actually. So, it's the only way to graduate from kindergarten. So, Akhenaten, as Moses, was assigned to build this Solomon's Temple, Amarna Amenti, where groups of people could have bliss experience and thus go through the heart of the sun, which is how advanced shamans actually graduate. And if you look at the measurement of how that works, when 1 million children sing the same song, it's been measured, I think, about 11 different times, that the solar flare activity is dramatically reduced, which is to say, when 1 million children sing the same song, the sun goes, ah. And what that means, I have this lovely graph if I can find it. Here it is. So this is the average of the number of solar flares, and this is the number of days before and after a global meditation event. And this is the average of those events as they affected the numbers of solar flares. And this is one of the main events there. So, and there's many measurements like this. So for the same reason that focused human attention compresses electric field, when 1 million people pay attention to the same thing, look what happens to the sun. She goes, ah, I can compress well. That's called the definition of peace. Peacemaking is the activity of making that centripetal force. So, now we can finish our story. What's an example of peacemaking? Well, at the time, they had about 1 year's notice that the Spanish Armada was coming. And it's actually true that John Dee in Prague and Queen Elizabeth up in England knew it was pretty much the end of the world if the Catholics won, because King Philip was absolutely nuts. I mean, the guy was insane. You don't want to know, right? And so if he took over the world, I mean, it's toast, really. So they had to make a plan, and they did. They got together all of the... There are 7 hills outside and 5 hills inside in Prague, actually, and they got to the Kabbalists on the outer hills,